This is main event Jey Uso, a moniker that some fans have begun to wonder, is it exactly accurate, and does he even deserve this title in the first place, among other titles that he may or may not get in the future? Well, Jey Uso and his rise to fame and his possible decline is the topic of this episode, because today, the internet wrestling community seems to have certain criticisms that come and go in waves of popularity, and right now the trendy thing to do is to find a babyface and say, the fans are turning on him. They did this with Cody Rhodes, and they also did it with The Rock, and now it seems like it's Jey Uso's turn in the barrel. But just because it's trendy amongst internet nerds doesn't mean that it's necessarily incorrect. In fact, it can be very true. And so, is this precise phenomenon happening to Jey Uso right now? Well, to find out, let's start, day one-ish? Or more accurately, let's just start with this year's WrestleMania, as his match against his brother Jimmy Uso sucked. And the sentiment isn't just shared by me, as there are many others who also feel the same way, one of which is actually Jey Uso himself, who recently gave an interview where he said that he was afraid of disappointing fans, and he thought that the main problem with this bout was all about timing, as they didn't have enough time to really put on a good match. But personally, while I do agree it's a matter of time, I don't feel the same way as Mr. Main Event Jey. For starters, I feel like today's matches are way too long as it is, and at 11 minutes and 5 seconds, I think the match had plenty of time to tell the story that they were trying to tell. They just, didn't. For starters, I have a problem that a lot of matches today don't start with two guys just going on a tear, where it really does look like they genuinely hate each other. Two guys in a blood feud just pulverizing each other as soon as the bell rings, or even before. That's something we don't see a lot of nowadays, which is weird because it's pretty easy to do. And when you have a match that's brother versus brother, this should just be a layup. As one thing that I feel they should have introduced sooner was the idea that Jimmy was trying to manipulate Jey, and using the fact that they're brothers against him, only to no avail. If Jimmy was going to try to play the brother card, I wish they sowed the seeds of that earlier on, that way it could have paid off later in the match. But either way, the story just wasn't here for me, and one of the reasons that might be is because, there's some out there who would say that tag team wrestlers don't really have a whole lot of story in them. Especially when you consider other cases of sibling rivalry, like the Hardys for example, did much better on the WrestleMania stage than the Usos did, and that match wasn't even a favorite amongst many people. Now, personally, I don't feel this way, but there are some out there who would say that tag team wrestling, especially when it comes to high flyer tag teams, usually just rely on spots instead of plots. And for some, this is just used as evidence to show that Main Event Jey is really just a tag team guy and nothing more. However, I do take issue with that for a number of reasons. Number one, who's to say that tag team wrestling can't be main event material? After all, we did see Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn main event against the Usos in night one of WrestleMania last year, and this year's night one main event was also a tag team bout. And let's also remember that the first WrestleMania of all time had a tag team match as its main event. And secondly, I also think we really don't give tag team wrestling enough credit, as a lot of people view a career as a tag team wrestler as a bad thing, as you're supposed to break tag teams up and bring one of them up to single stardom and kick the other one out. I don't agree with that at all. Now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and take the time to look at how tag team wrestling does differ from that of singles wrestling. And one of the biggest differences is, of course, the ability to tag, as this renders things like rest holds to be fairly unnecessary, as anytime you get tired you can just simply tag out and bring your partner in and catch yourself a little break. But when you're going one-on-one, you don't have that as an option, and therefore your whole pacing, your whole timing is completely thrown off. And yes, I'm fully aware that both Jey and Jimmy have had plenty of singles bouts, so it's not like they're unfamiliar with this. But when you had the two of them going against each other, a lot of their chemistry that worked when it came to being partners kind of dissolved when it came to being opponents, especially considering that fast-paced action is what we come to love with the Usos, and with a very similar skill set, there was nobody to compensate for what the other couldn't do. And so, while I do think that Jimmy and Jey's match needed more refinement at WrestleMania, I still feel that Jimmy was the right opponent for him at that time. Even if the match was lackluster, it did make sense from a storyline perspective. But speaking of which, let's look at some of Jey's other opponents. After all, as Lex Luthor once said, the great men and women of history have all been defined by their enemies. And when Jey Uso has gone against Gunther not once, but twice, both for the Intercontinental title and then in the King of the Ring tournament, I have to ask, Is Jay more over than Gunther? Now I'm sure the answer to that differs from person to person, but my overall point is, if a major heel is more over than a major babyface, well that is something of a problem now, isn't it? And therefore, maybe sticking Jay against the ring general not once but twice might not have been the smartest move. Oh, and let's also point out that one of Gunther's more preferred opponents in Ilya Dragunov did not get to beat main event Jay, and that had some fans all up in a tizzy. But who else is he supposed to go against, since all of his feuds that make sense storyline-wise are against his family, even if the matches themselves aren't the most memorable? Is there any heel right now in WWE that could help to raise Jey Uso's stock? But, you know what? If there isn't, well, there are some fans out there who are suggesting maybe the heel should be Jay himself. Another piece of advice that the IWC loves to dole out is that whenever somebody isn't quite getting over, that you have to turn them heel. However, that only works in the context which was originally posed in the beginning of this video, and it's that, is Jey Uso over to begin with? While there are many people on the internet who are quick to say that the fans are indeed turning on Jay, that is something that's kind of hard to prove, as you'll notice that his entrance is poppin' whenever he comes out, as fans just love doing the yeet thing. Although the Jay detractors out there will say that it's the entrance that's over, and not him. Because as soon as the bell rings or whenever he picks up a microphone, the crowd doesn't seem nearly as into it as they are for other people. Now, my major problem with this is trying to decipher whether or not somebody is over simply based off of crowd reactions is not the easiest thing to do. While this should be fairly cut and dry, there are some fans out there who hear one crowd's reaction as thunderous applause, while there are other fans who will hear crickets, making audience participation on a decibel level fairly harder to interpret. Furthermore, let's remember that entrances do vary from location to location. For example, let's go to Backlash in France, where the cell phones were lit up for main event Jay. However, there was some backlash for this Backlash entrance when Jay stated that the Fireflies were now his, and that he was the Yeeter of Worlds, as there were those who didn't take too kindly to that statement. But one metric that is way easier to go off of is that of merchandise sales, which Jay has plenty. He's consistently ranked in the top 10 of merchandise sales, if not the top 5, and in some cases he's even number 1. And this dates back to 2021, before him and Jimmy even split up. Sure, he might have been siphoning off of that bloodline momentum, but nevertheless, this kind of consistency is exactly why WWE thought he belonged in the main event in the first place. Additionally, he has also been removed from Roman Reigns for quite some time. He's even on a different show now. And if Jay was simply being carried by the bloodline, then how come he's doing as well as he is now? And furthermore, how come Jimmy isn't? Is Jey Uso over with the crowd? Are the fans turning on him? Well, that's a question I leave to you. Let me know down in the comments what you think, and please make sure you're subscribed here to the Thinking Fans channel and that you give this video a big like. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.